exercise doesn't help weight loss?
No. The reason exercise doesn't work is because
Professor Tim Spector.
He's an award-winning scientist,
Best-selling author and medical professor.
And he is ranked in the top 100 of the world's most cited scientists.
we're going to be talking about the future of personalised nutrition.
Many consider you to be the leading expert on gut health and diet. What's your view on the ketogenic diet?
Virtually impossible.
What about vitamins?
Waste of money.
What are the facts around fasting?
Oh dear.
Oh shit, what do you mean, oh dear?
The food industry wants you to focus on calorie, fat content, sugar, so you don't have to think about the quality of the food. There's never been any long-term study showing that calorie counting is an effective way to lose weight and maintain weight loss. This is why I want people to think about food very differently than we have done in the past.
So what is the cost?
Depression and anxiety is intricately linked to the quality of your gut microbes. So these are microscopic bugs in our intestines. All of them are able to pump out chemicals that are vital for our body when they're fed the right foods. The reason we're in this state is we've killed off a lot of our good bugs. I think people don't think of all the positive benefits. They don't think that you need to build them up.
God, it's so confusing. You know, when you walk down the aisle in the supermarket, everything is trying to pretend that it's good. So how do I know what is good?
You have to...
Quick one. At the start of these episodes, I told you that 74% of people who watch this channel frequently haven't yet hit the subscribe button. And I told you that the bigger the channel gets, the better the guests get. And hopefully I've delivered upon that for you. So there's two things I wanted to tell you. The first is, if you've ever enjoyed this channel, could you do me a favor and my team here a favor, which is hit that subscribe button, because it helps this channel more than you know. And as I say, the bigger the channel, the better the guests. But also, we're approaching 1 million subscribers. And when we hit 1 million subscribers, we've been working for many months to do something very big in which you're all invited to. I'll reveal that when we hit 1 million subscribers. On these subject matters. I mean, I've read 2 of them that are sat in front of me here. I'm really intrigued by the personal story as well, because writing these books and doing all the work you've done is a lot. It's a lot of work. It requires a lot of drive. I mean, this particular book, you said it took almost 6 years to finish. What is the personal drive behind that? What is driving you to pursue this subject matter?
You know, I just love getting into a new area, finding out that something that everyone's been quoting for decades is total BS and was based on some tiny study of 9 people. It's like I'm a detective. And so I've always had this quest to sort of be this obsessional detective, I think, going into these areas. And at the same time, that's coincided with, you know, various events in my life as well that have probably pushed me in certain directions more than other, you know, that I wouldn't have gone otherwise. What
were those events in your life?
I guess, you know, I was a pretty lazy student at school.
Same.
Might surprise some people. People always assume if you're a professor and you've made it, you were a swot at school, but I did the absolute minimum. So I scraped into medical school, scraped through the first few years of medical school. I'd spent 1 year proving that you didn't have to go to any lectures and could still pass, which was a lot of work, actually. At the end, I realised it was harder. Then, of course, age 21, my father died. Suddenly overnight with a heart attack. No warning at all. I was off on a skiing holiday with some friends. And I think in retrospect, that event changed me and perhaps gave me, you know, a bit more direction and drive than I would have had. I'm not quite sure, you know, how it would have turned out if he hadn't died. But to me, him dying at 57, suddenly like that, made me think I need to, you know, make more of my life. I could die early too. This was something that, you know, I think spurred me on to do all this kind of stuff that I didn't need to do, but I felt perhaps more compulsion to do, and maybe also got me interested in this whole idea of genetics, to say, well, you know, did he have rotten genes? Have I got the same genes? Am I going to die in my 50s? So I think that, looking back now, I think it's hard to be absolutely sure, but that seems a reasonable scenario.
I read, and I've heard from members of your team that left you with a feeling, as you've kind of said there, that you might also die young if it is a genetic thing.
Definitely, yes. No, I was always telling my kids, you know, this is it. You know, how many? I was sort of half joking, but saying, well, you know, my time's, you know, I've only got 7 years to go now. You know, whatever it is.
You were saying that to your kids?
Yes, you know, that
to try and prepare them.
I guess so, but it was my way of, you know, I did it in a jokey way. It wasn't like I was writing my will and saying, you know, the candlesticks are here and the everything else. But it was, yeah, I used to make light of it. But, you know, underneath it, yes, I felt, well, you know, I could go early, so I need to get on with it, I think. And I was also at that time probably was sped up by another personal incident I had at that time.
Which was a mini stroke?
Yes, we call it a mini stroke. It's a vascular occlusion, but I couldn't work for 3 months. I couldn't read, and I got a bit depressed about that.
So those 3 months where you can't read, I read that you were, the quote, I went from being a sporty, fitter than average middle-aged man to a pill-popping, depressed stroke victim with high blood pressure. They said you were floored by this experience, and for 3 months you couldn't work. From having a pretty fast-paced, frenetic life to being bedbound. And in those 3 months, your focus on the microbiome increases, right?
Yes, I was just finishing up the very last bits of the previous book, Identically Different, which is about why twins were different.
Right.
And as a sort of afterthought, had added one page about, well, actually the microbiome could be the key to this.
What is the microbiome?
It's the word we use for the community of gut microbes. These are microscopic bugs in our intestines. And it's a biome because it's like this jungle community. It's lots of different species altogether, thousands of them that coexist in our lower intestine, our colon. And it's like we've discovered in the last 10 years a new organ in our bodies. If you put them all together, they weigh about the same as our brain. Okay, so that's mind-boggling, really, to think about all these bugs, which individually are tiny. Putting them together, they actually they weigh several pounds. So you can either think of them as a microbial garden, but increasingly I'm shifting that towards thinking of them as an incredible pharmacy. So all of them are able to pump out chemicals all the time that are vital for our body. So thousands of different chemicals are pumped out every minute by these gut microbes when they're fed the right foods. And these chemicals are key for our immune system. Most of our immune system is actually in our gut. Most people don't know that. We think it's under our armpits or somewhere. But actually, all the immune cells are actually talking all the time to our gut microbes through these chemicals. And that our immune system obviously is crucial for our whole body and fighting aging and cancer, COVID, infections, allergies, all these kind of things. So then you've also got the microbes can produce chemicals that affect the brain and will make the difference between you being happy or sad, or we know that they're vital in depression. Important for regulating how much you eat, your appetite, when you feel full. They also provide key vitamins for you, all the B vitamins and many other components, neurochemicals like serotonin that's key for the happiness, and how antidepressants work are all produced by your gut microbes. So we're slowly learning that these guys are absolutely crucial to how our body responds to anything coming into it, whether it's painkillers, whether it's antidepressants, whether it's chemicals in the form of food. And this is why I want people to think about food very differently than we have done in the past. The old idea that food is just calories, macros, with its fats and carbs and proteins. Those four things, that's 100 years old mentality. But key to it is this core of our gut health, which we've ignored totally. And this was this big aha moment for me after research for 10 years. Why would identical twins be different? What could it be? And it turns out their gut microbes are different. That's the only thing I've ever found in 30 years that's really different about identical twins. And that explains why one gets cancer, the other one doesn't, why one gets an autoimmune disease, or one's depressed and one's happy. So for me, that the twins were a perfect, obvious way to show that how important these microbes are for all of us.
What are some of the biggest myths you encountered as you started researching the microbiome that most people currently believe, that I probably sat here now believe, about how to keep my gut healthy? What are some of those key myths? Because I know you like myth busting.
Well, I think most people believe that probiotics in yogurt get killed by your stomach acid. So they don't work because everything gets killed off. That's a common one I hear.
But they don't?
No. Some get killed, but you're ingesting billions, so always enough get through to have an effect. And we know that probiotics do work, although the best probiotics are in food rather than in capsules. And there's plenty of fermented foods, which is the same. I think most people know very little about microbes. They think that most of them are harmful. So, they cultured this microbe, or they found a parasite. 50,000 people we've now looked at their gut microbes in the US and the UK. In the UK, 24% have a parasite. And that parasite is actually beneficial. It's called blastocystis, and it's associated with good health, being thinner, having less internal fat, lower blood pressure. And, in the past, we're trying to kill it off. And actually, the reason we're in this state is we've killed off a lot of our good bugs. So I think people need to realize that most of the bugs in our system are trying to help us. And we've actually lost half of the good ones compared to if you go to hunter-gatherers or, I spent some time with the Hadza tribe in Africa, and, they have twice the number of species that we have because they don't pop antibiotics, they don't have sterile foods, they have a very wide range of diverse plants, etc. So I think people think that, their gut microbes are really only there to hurt them when they have a bad kebab or something. They don't think of all the positive benefits. They don't think that you need to build them up, and that actually, they're like the more you've got, the better it is.
How do I build them up? How do I become more like that tribe?
You have to have a more diverse range of plants. So we did a study a few years ago with the British and American guts that showed that if you can get up to 30 different types of plant a week, you maximize your diversity of species in your gut. And that's that diversity that we want. Remember, 30 plants, you look a bit shocked, but that's a plant is a nut, a seed. It's not just kale. It's a herb. It's a spice. And things like coffee are a plant to me because it comes from a fermented bean. So it's that diversity. It's having more fermented foods. It's having a range of colors. It's cutting out the ultra-processed chemicals as well, which all the groups in the population that have the best gut microbes, they don't eat ultra-processed foods. They don't have antibiotics. They don't have this modern Western lifestyle.
You mentioned calories there as well when you were talking about the microbiome. One of my friends is a prolific calorie counter. And, he eats a lot of Domino's pizzas. He listens to this podcast, so he's going to know exactly. He's going to know that I'm atting him. He eats Domino's pizzas all the time. He eats like a real, processed food diet, but then says to me it's all about calorie counting. Now, with all due respect, friend, he's never managed to, I shouldn't say that, but it's not necessarily worked for him in terms of the goal that he set himself. So when I was reading about your view on calorie counting in your book Spoon-Fed, I screenshotted it this morning and sent it to him, and I said, you are a bullshitter. That's what I said in the message, and we had a good laugh about it this morning. But what is your view on calorie counting and this idea that we can, weight loss or being healthy is just about having a calorie deficit?
It's complete nonsense.
Thank you. I will clip that and send it to him.
There's never been any long-term study showing that calorie counting is an effective way to lose weight and maintain weight loss after the first few weeks. So yes, very strict calorie counting. If you deprive yourself for a few weeks, you will lose some weight. But even if you're successful, your body's evolutionary mechanisms will make you hungry and hungrier every week you go by where you're depriving yourself of energy. Your body will go into sort of shutdown mode. Your metabolism slows down, so you're not expending those calories. And inevitably, I'd say more than 95% of people will go back to their baseline, and many go above it. They sort of rebound back if they're doing this style of calorie restriction. Now, calorie counting is a part of that. So people try and say, okay, I'm not going on a dramatic diet, but I'm going to just try and reduce by 10% my calories in the day, which in the old theory was supposed to make you lose weight. Well, it's virtually impossible, even professionals, to count calories. And because they're not very accurate for a start, everything on the packet, you have to weigh everything. And in restaurants now, we're supposed to have these calorie counts. They're plus or minus about 30%, because portion size makes such a huge difference to it. And it's been shown in the US to be a worthless exercise anyway. So you can't count them going in. You can't really count your metabolism going out either. We're all incredibly different. You know, your friend's probably been told 2,500 calories is what he's allowed. Well, that's an average, but it doesn't mean it's related to him. My average is much lower when I tested it. So everyone is an individual, and this is another thing we need to move away from this one-size-fits-all guidelines. But I think more importantly is that the whole calorie counting assumption means that it doesn't matter what form that calorie is, it has the same effect in your body. Therefore, whether you're cutting out fat calories or carb calories or, you know, low calorie sodas or whatever it is, it's going to be fine. But we now know that's not true. And there's several science experiments which now absolutely nail that. One was in America, where they gave people identical meals for 2 weeks in a sort of enclosed semi-prison. And one was homemade and one was ultra-processed, both identical calories, macros the same. The group with the ultra-processed foods overate by about 200 calories every day. They kept coming back to the buffet for more. Okay, so yes, the same calories, but the effect on the body meant they were hungrier.
Why is that?
We don't know for sure. It could be that those chemicals in the ultra-processed foods affect the gut microbes, and they then send signals to the brain saying, eat more. This isn't a natural, you know, this is a really weird chemical. It's doing something weird to me. I'm producing something weird in exchange. It could be that they get absorbed much quicker. So you get a big sugar rush, and you know, the nutrients get in to your body in a way faster than they should do in nature. And so your brain doesn't have time to say, I'm full. It normally takes 20 minutes or so to get that fullness. Or, you know, it could be the matrix of the food, it could be the chemicals in the food, it could be its effect on the gut microbes. But it also could be things like your sugar spikes. So in the Zoe Predict studies, where basically we've given now 50,000 people in the US and the UK the same foods at the same time of day, everyone's got these muffins. We show that people, 1 in 4 people who have these muffins and we wear glucose monitors, which tells you for 2 weeks what's happening in your glucose. 1 in 4 people get a real sugar dip 3 hours later. So this is where you rise in sugar, which is normal, and then as it comes down, it goes below baseline. But only in 1 in 4 people. And when that happens, those people end up overeating their next meal, and during the day, they feel more tired, more hungry. That's the sort of 11 o'clock slump, if you like. If you've had a carby breakfast, some people feel that, others don't. And what's really interesting is that, so 1 in 4 people eating an identical muffin of identical calories will then overeat by this, you know, another 10% that day. So you can see how that just blows the calorie idea out, that the calories in equals calories out, everything's the same. And the third thing is that ultra-processed food says it has the calories that's equal to the whole foods, but often they don't account for the fact that it's ground up, it's highly refined. And so if you take like almonds or something like this, they might use ground almonds, and you compare ground almonds to whole almonds, there's perhaps 30% less available calories in the whole almonds than there is in the other ones. So the whole thing is a complete nonsense, and it's there because the food industry wants you to focus on the calorie, the fat content, sugar, so you don't have to think about the quality of the food. And it's something that they can control very easily, get their profits higher, keep adding stuff to the product that's synthetic, when we know that a lot of things they're adding are harmful for our gut microbes. So the artificial sweeteners are harmful, the glues, they stick the foods together, the emulsifiers, some people react quite a lot to those and they cause problems. So the whole thing is like this giant camouflage. And that's really one thing probably my number one bugbear is to get people to see the light, stop obsessing about calories and start thinking about food much more as quality and what it does to your body.
Quality food. What is quality food in your definition of the phrase?
It's the opposite of ultra-processed food, which is whole food, which is made with from the original ingredients of plants, mainly plant-based, but it's not exclusively, that contains all the nutrients that those plants produce without it being stripped away or boiled up or highly pressurized, deformed, and so they have to add in back those nutrients. So, it's things in their pure form. So it's nuts, it's seeds, it's grains that haven't been ground up super finely. It's all the amazing plants and fruits and vegetables that we've got. They're healthy foods, but it's not straightforward. Yes, I've got this list of 10 superfoods. It's understanding that many foods that are healthy for us. Most of them are in their original form. Berries, nuts, virtually every vegetable is healthy for us if it's in that original form. It's only because we had to learn to preserve things. We had to do trickery to make margarines and things with chemistry that we've moved away from that. But going back, olive oil, for example, is a great example of something that's vilified often because it has lots of fats in it, and certainly I was told the Mediterranean they have olive oil on everything. It's horrible. It's all fatty. Turns out that's it comes from the olive. The good stuff, extra virgin olive oil, has very little done to it, and that is a good, healthy, quality food. But it can be refined. You can take that and you can keep refining it. You can take corn on the cob as an example, and then you've got tortilla chips or something down the other end, or cornflakes, which bears no resemblance to the original, and they're all versions on a spectrum.
God, it's so confusing, because what you've said to me is, based on research and studies. But then when I go to a supermarket, labeling, I was just thinking then cornflakes. I think I grew up thinking cornflakes were healthy because it says corn in the title. You know what I mean? And when you're trying to navigate, I was just thinking, if I'm going down an aisle now, hearing what you've just said, that quality food is food that is not ultra processed and kind of resembles its original form. When you walk down the aisle in the supermarket, everything is trying to pretend that it's good. So how do I know what is good? I mean, I can go to the vegetable aisle and I can say, okay, that looks like a cabbage. It looks like no one's messed with that. There's been no study done on that. It hasn't been through a laboratory. But how do I, if I'm in an aisle tomorrow, how do I know what food is good and what is not?
Well, you've said the first thing. If it's not in a package, you're pretty sure it's good. Okay. So if it's concealed in some package that's got, happy children and signals of vitamins in it, that should be a warning sign. The more they have to advertise the food and say what its additives are and everything, the more you should be wary about it. The number of ingredients is another pretty good sign. So once you get over 10, particularly if there's lots you've never heard of, you wouldn't find in your kitchen, you should also be wary that is ultra-processed food. Anything that says low calorie, means they've had to add in lots of artificial sweeteners or protein extracts or something else, is also a big danger sign. Low in fat means they've replaced the natural fat with something else that's cheaper, and these are all warning signs. You take breakfast cereals. I mean, I used to eat lots of breakfast cereals. I was brought up on them, highly sugary stuff, and then I thought I was being healthy when I moved to mueslis and posher stuff. But actually, when you still, that appearance of healthiness, it's still got lots of additives in it. It's still got lots of sugar in it. Those cereal packets have added vitamins in it, but they're often in a very poor form. I did an experiment once where I took some cornflakes or Special K, I can't remember, that said had added iron. And if you mix it up, you can put a magnet on it, you can get off the iron filings. They're so cheap that they just added to tick a box saying it has iron, but they don't get into your body or do anything. So anything that's got these things added with this in it, low in this, is a sign that they're obscuring the quality of the product. So it's, but it's a lot of we've been brainwashed for years and decades in this. And, I was as well as a doctor, I should know better. And yet I've completely changed two of my meals completely. So I've gone from having muesli with low-fat milk and an orange juice and a cup of tea, because I did, when I started doing these tests for Zoe, I found out that gave me a massive sugar spike. And it was a terrible way to start the day. And I got these dips at 11 o'clock, to a high full-fat yogurt, nuts, seeds, a few berries, and never have orange juice. That's a really unhealthy drink for everybody. And I have lots of black coffee, which I now know is good for me. So that's totally different. I changed my lunch for at least 10, 15 years. When I got in the hospital, I was having a hospital lunch, which used to be in the canteen. Then it was the Marks and Spencer's. Got a healthy looking sandwich with brown bread, sweet corn, and tuna, and a smoothie in a little bottle. And that gave me a massive sugar spike. And I wouldn't have known that. And I was told that should have been a healthy thing to eat. So, there's general rules, but also there are specific rules. And this whole idea of individuality is coming in. So it could be that you might be fine on that. Don't know. I was very annoyed because when we were starting doing this testing for Zoe, I had all these spare kits, and I gave my wife one as well. And we sit down, and she's French-Belgian and loves croissants, and so we'd have croissant each. Mine would shoot up. She had no change at all in her sugar, which was really annoying.
Yeah.
So, but it also brings home the fact that everyone loves simplistic rules, but you can only get so far with them. You have to start experimenting yourself and see what works for you, and not just take everything for granted. And that's really that's the whole essence of really, setting up this personalized nutrition research and Zoe and everything else. But on top of this general advice about changing a whole idea of food, I think, because I think they do go hand in hand, that if you realize there are these individual differences, you realize it's not as simple as you've been told. It's not that fats are evil. It's not that calories are bad. It's much more nuanced.
You mentioned breakfast there. I heard that you do some intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting. I think I pronounced that correctly.
Intermittent fasting.
Yes, we'll just use AI to swap that for my voice. What is it's intermittent? Let's just call it fasting, okay? Just for people at home that can't say it. Fasting has become a really popular thing over the last 3 or 4 years. A lot of my friends talk about it. Again, it's almost feels like it's going into fad territory again. But what are the facts around fasting intermittently?
Okay, I guess it's been quite a hot topic for about 10 years now, but intermittent fasting is an umbrella term for all kinds of different fasting. And you might remember the 5-2 style of intermittent fasting was quite big about 10 years ago. And there were also these extended fasts, often used in America, people doing 2 or 3 day fasts and detoxifying.
Oh gosh, yeah.
That sort of stuff. So you've got to realize that you have to specify what time, what we're talking about. But I think the most interesting type of fasting now is what's called time-restricted eating.
Time-restricted eating, I can say that.
TRE, okay? So the idea is you don't change what you eat, you just change how you eat, and you change your eating window. So most people in the UK and US, they'll be eating for 14 or 16 hours a day.
It's me.
Right? Lots of snacks and extending late night. And what time restricted eating is, we're trying to reduce that to something like 10 hours. on average. Okay, it varies. There are some more extreme ones, some milder ones, but that seems to be about the sweet spot that most people can manage. 10 hours, which means you start eating at 11 and you finish at 9, for example, or you might want to go from 8 in the morning until 6 at night, or 7. I can't do my maths. Now, there's actually science behind this now. So there's plenty of studies showing that not only in mice and rats, this helps their metabolism, their energy management, but there's some evidence it helps with weight loss to a small extent, but it improves your inflammation levels, and a lot of people report energy and mood improvements. We've just done a big study with the Zoe Health study, which is the free app, where we had 130,000 people sign up to do this trial, if you like, where they would do this for 2 weeks. And amazingly, most people managed it. And we did see improvements in mood and energy just in that 2-week period. And actually hunger went down, weirdly. But a lot of this we found is people were actually snacking less. So we won't tell them to do less. You can do whatever you like in that time. But people were just paying more attention and not grabbing something to eat just before they went to bed. Now, the science behind it is really interesting because your body needs time to recover. So your cells, we're programmed on this circadian rhythm that is very much in line with the sun from, when we were all in East Africa, and it was, everything was quite programmed so that our body is in this state of work during the day. We eat, do all our stuff, and then at night it recovers. As the stress hormones go down, then your repair stuff comes out. So it cleans up all the muck in our cells. But we now know that it's the same happening in our guts. So if you rest your gut for 14 hours, you give time for all the other microbes to come out and act as a repair team, like a cleaning force that hoover up all the mess you've left behind. They clean up nicely your gut wall, and so it's not leaky, get rid of inflammation. And this change, giving them a break, really seems to have these great benefits. So I was a real skeptic about this, and I did lots of fasting and things for experimenting with the books. But I think the last 2 years I've really been convinced that this is something that does work and is right for some people. But importantly, it's not right for everybody. And there is an individuality. You may be a snacker that finds it very hard to go long periods of time without eating. Okay, I do know we've got several people at Zoe who say, "Oh, this is terrible." But for me, I suddenly realized when I wake up in the morning, I'm not starving. It's not the first thing I think in my head, and it's very easy to wait till 11 o'clock to have something to eat, and it's not a big deprivation. It's something you could carry on the whole of your life, which I think is what we're into here. So I think there's a lot to be said for this, but I think people need to personalize it. Again, people love a single black and white solution to all their problems, but I'd say to everyone, try it. You may want to, do a sort of American style, eating really early and finishing early. You might be that kind of person who's a sort of morning person, or you might be someone that prefers the social life of eating in the evening and skipping the morning.
It's going to be take quite a lot of discipline for me to stop having chocolate at 2 a.m. So could you just summarize again, time restricted eating, the key benefits of it are my microbiome will be healthier, gives my microbiome more time to clean up, which will have an impact potentially on weight loss and overall energy levels, etc., etc. Mood. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's enough for me. I think that's a convincing enough reason. And I imagine there's also an impact on sleep there, because me having chocolate at 2 a.m. is probably not going to help me have quality sleep at night.
Absolutely, yes. No, I think there is a link. We're studying that. We don't have any results from that trial, but we are logging sleep quality as well. But personally, when I've started to do it, I do sleep better. I did start to get some reflux as well. So a lot of people suffer from heartburn.
Right.
And that's, again, because you're eating and drinking alcohol quite late, then not leaving enough time to go to bed. That causes sort of stress on your body when it's supposed to be relaxing. So I think, everyone give that a try, and it could be right for you. And it just makes you think also, just thinking about more what you're eating, to say, okay, let's give my body a rest, just like you would if you're doing an exercise regime, whatever. It's just thinking about eating in a different way other than just fuel.
What about vitamins? I've got all these vitamins by my bedside. Not by my bedside, by my bathroom sink in my bedroom. Because, I went to some market and the lady there told me that all these vitamins are important. And then, I don't know, I might have seen an ad on Facebook or something and I ended up buying more vitamins. And I'm like a collector of vitamins.
We're not alone. I think 50% of the British population have a regular vitamin or supplement every day. And it's massive industry.
I read chapter 5 of your book.
So I'm a bit rude about vitamins in there.
Please. Please be.
So yeah. I know, it's the thing that upsets people most. People say, I believe everything else you say, but I don't believe your chapter on vitamins. And again, it's a bit like a religion, popping a pill and hoping that it's doing some good. All the evidence shows that when you do a randomized controlled trial, these vitamins don't work unless you've got some really weird disease or deficiency, or for some reason you can't eat a normal diet. But it's a last resort for people who have terrible diets. If you have a decent, varied diet with plenty of plants in it, you don't need vitamins at all. And I used to take them, and I don't take any now, except the occasional B12, because I've always been low in B12 and I have hardly any meat. But apart from B12, all the evidence points to these things being a complete waste of money.
You're telling me all those vitamins I've swallowed over the last 10 years have been the result of me being duped by the vitamin industry and have no material impact on my health?
Yes. Well, they might have had some harmful effects, like people taking calcium and things like this are shown if you take regular calcium tablets, more likely to get heart disease.
You're joking. I've literally got a tub of calcium tablets by my kitchen sink as we speak.
Yeah, well, there's calcium in nearly every plant and things that we normally break down and absorb in small amounts regularly. You take something like a calcium supplement, you might be taking 0.5 gram of it. Our body isn't designed to break down that huge slab of chemical, and so it doesn't get distributed well, and studies show that it gets deposited in your arteries and can harden them up. So there's no evidence that calcium helps people, doesn't help broken bones, it doesn't help osteoporosis, all the things that we were told it did do. So all the evidence was out there, and you've got all these companies pushing it. So many of these things can be counterproductive, but my main worry about them is if people think they can pop a pill, they don't have to think about proper food.
Yeah.
And therefore everything comes in a bottle or a pill. They can go, just have a junk food diet and be healthy. And that's so wrong, because diet, I think, is the most, as I said, the most important food choices we make for our health. And to take stuff that doesn't work, that could be counterproductive and sometimes harmful, is a daft delusion.
I have been under a daft delusion. I've got so many supplements upstairs.
Well, they could have a placebo effect. You might feel better because you've taken them, So
I feel like a healthy person because I take them. I don't know whether I am a healthy person, but I feel like one. When I do it, and it's really uncomfortable because sometimes I'm taking like 8 different pills, like calcium and potassium and whatever else, and when I'm doing it, even though it's hard to swallow them and it tastes rancid, I feel like I'm doing future Steve a favor.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
But clearly I haven't been.
Get someone to make you some dummy ones so there's got nothing harmful in it and you can still feel good. But a lot cheaper.
I'll give that a shot. What about sugar? So I was keto for roughly the last 2 months. I tried the diet because I had a lot of good things about the ketogenic diet as it relates to inflammation. And I have to be honest, I lost about 1 stone in weight fairly quickly. First time I've really seen a huge dip in my weight, but also not just that, the gut issues that I'd had seemed to go. So I'd almost lived for the last couple of years, specifically like after the age of 25 for some reason. Suddenly foods that I thought had gluten in them, like white breads and pastas, and even like soy sauce and things like that, were making me live in this permanent state of like being bloated, and I'd go to the toilet and I didn't feel great. And it was kind of this pain throughout the day, a couple of hours after eating one of those foods. And then I tried the ketogenic diet. So I cut out pretty much all of those things. Like I didn't have any bread, most of the sort of processed bad carb. I don't even know what I'm talking about here, so correct me. But I cut out what I thought were the bad carbs that were having a bad reaction on me. And then I cut out a lot of sugar, like refined sugars, basically cut it completely out. And I ate meat, vegetables, berries and things like that. Felt fantastic. Lost a stone in weight. Very, very, very lean. Body fat dropped completely. Slept well, high energy. What's your view on the ketogenic diet?
Well, your story is, I mean, you can take it two ways. One, you could say you really improved your diet because it sounds like you had a pretty shitty diet before that, right? So, so you know what I mean? So anything could have been an improvement if someone says, if you're eating real foods, right? So it sounds like the keto, you weren't having keto out of a bottle or a plastic.
No. I was having meals.
Yeah.
I had someone come and prepare them for me.
Proper home-cooked meals rather than takeaways and
exactly.
So you're making the shift from perhaps the average UK diet, which is high in refined carbs, which is probably had a fair bit of ultra-processed foods in there as well, to this other diet. So I would expect you to feel better. To be a keto diet, you've got to get to about 70% fat, right? Which is really, really hard for anyone to sustain. It's virtually impossible.
That's why I said for the last 2 months I'm no longer on the keto diet.
So you have probably done a mild keto diet,
right?
That didn't put you into ketosis,
right,
but got you off these high refined carbs.
Yeah.
So, but going back to the basic question, keto diets do seem to work for people with diabetes who are overweight as a way of getting them off their medications and sort of kick-starting them into a better health pattern. And there are some people I think it can work for. I think as a sustainable diet, I don't think it makes any sense. I don't think many people can still be on it a year later if it's a true ketogenic diet, because no studies have really shown that people can sustain eating that level of fat and protein and virtually no carbs.
That's all I ate for about 8 weeks.
Yeah, but you were eating plants as well.
So I'd have like some plants.
It wasn't just steak, was it?
It was. I mean, at one point it felt like that. It was. There was some plants in there. There was sort of like lettuce and broccolis and stuff like that. But I was Googling everything to check if it was keto friendly before I put it in my mouth.
So, so I think what interesting is if you went from that to a more mixed, healthy, gut-friendly diet, which includes fermented foods, small amounts of breads, grains, etc. I think you'd still find the same benefits because you're shifting from ultra, because I would suspect that if you did the Zoe test, for example, you would have quite a big reaction to sugars, and your fat control would be quite good. So it sounds like you tolerate quite large amounts of fat without too much problem. Whereas the sugars would spike like me. You get a reaction, you get hunger, you get, these feelings of tiredness, etc. So just by upping your fat levels, lowering your refined carb levels, you might have produced the same without doing that extreme idea. Because my problem with the keto diets is ultimately it's restrictive. You're reducing the number of foods you're thinking about. You're ultimately then harming your gut microbes long term because you're not giving them the variety of different plants if you're not careful. And that happens to a lot of people. They go down any of these slightly fatty diets and they end up with a much more restrictive intakes than they would have done, which long term will cause some problems for their immune health and long-term health. So that's why I'm generally against these extreme diets of any kind, other than if you are seriously ill diabetic and you're overweight, for 3 months it could be a really good way to get you off your meds.
Interesting. Yeah, because I'm trying to find now. So I went from the keto diet to the New York diet. Basically, we went to New York for 2 weeks, and I really fucked up. But now I'm back. I'm trying to find the nice middle ground, the sustainable middle ground. That word sustainability in my diet and also my fitness has been key to me. Because if I can't sustain it, there's no point doing it because you end up yo-yoing afterwards. So I went from the keto diet, as I said, to the New York diet. and now I'm back in the UK. So
We'll go on the gut-friendly diet.
which is, please detail the gut-friendly diet.
Just, it's, 30 different plants a week, lots of fermented foods. That's your yogurts, your kefirs, your kombuchas. I don't know if you like kimchi, kraut, miso, koji, Japanese food. Eating the rainbow, so you've got plenty of colours on your plate. Everything's got, because that means you've got plants there that have got these defence chemicals. And we haven't talked about these, but these are the polyphenols that are in plants that give them their bitter taste, but also the bright colours that you get in berries and you get in bright coloured lettuce and cabbages. And they are rocket fuel for your gut microbes. So the more you've got of those, the healthier your gut, the more you dampen down inflammation. So really important to, as well as diversity, lots of colour and lots of high polyphenol foods, things you wouldn't have thought are healthy. So dark chocolate. I know you like dark chocolate. I'm not sure. Is it milk chocolate you have at 2 in the morning?
Yeah, it's milk chocolate.
Well, you need to change to dark chocolate.
My girlfriend says that she's obsessed with dark chocolate.
Well,
and she always tells me it's
take
healthy.
her lead. It's slowly wean yourself off the milk and get onto real chocolate, okay, which actually tastes of something really good rather than sugar.
Isn't white chocolate the worst?
Yes.
Do you know how I know that? That's the only thing I know about food. I went and did a chocolate making class, and at the start of the class, the instructor says, pour the sugar into, we had these big tubes, and she said, pour the sugar into the tube. So I'd poured a bit in. She was like, no. Fill that tube with 60% sugar. I was like, what? She was like, fill the tube with, I was like, well, why? She goes, that's white chocolate, it's 60% sugar.
Yeah.
So I pour this sugar into this tube and it fills it 60%. And then I put this little oily liquid in and she goes, mix it. And she goes, that's white chocolate, 60% sugar. There's people right now that are sat there eating it that realise that they're giving themselves early onset diabetes. But
So dark chocolate's a good example. Coffee we already mentioned. Do you like coffee?
I do. I don't, for me, coffee's more of a utility. I use it before I have these conversations so I don't fall asleep because I'm very, I've never been good
You
at...
might have a boring guest. And you think
Well, sometimes, but it's more so just to try and keep my mind sharp and to keep focused. But I read chapter 13 of your book about coffee, and I've always been a bit of a coffee skeptic because I tend to have a belief that everything in life comes with a cost. And no one I've sat here with has ever been able to tell me the cost of an artificial boost in my focus, attention, energy. I feel like nothing's for free in life, So what is the cost of coffee?
Well, I think there's a variability. Some people, there is a big cost. They get the shakes, they can't sleep, and it has other neurotoxic effects if you have too much. So I think it's all about dose. And this is, it is a drug that if you get the dose right, is very beneficial for you. If you get it wrong or you've got some genetic problem, you can't process it right, it's a problem. But some of the benefits I was talking about are also there in decaffeinated coffee. So it also has these, because again, it's a great example of how we always think of coffee as caffeine, right? And yet, if you do these epidemiology studies, these big population ones, people who are having regular decaf coffee also have similar heart benefits. So it's other things in this fermented bean that are helping us. And I think this is just, it's a great lesson moving away from our reductionism. We always like to think of, one food is one vitamin or one chemical, and that's an easy way to think about it. We can't comprehend they've got 1,000 different ingredients. So decaf coffee, but you've got green tea is also pretty good. There's many other fermented foods, but the polyphenols are really good and important to realize. And in the book, Food for Life, I go into exactly that. It's a practical guide to when you go into the supermarket and you go to the aisle, say, gosh, I'm in the vegetable aisle. Do I get my usual iceberg lettuce that 90% of us do because it lasts for 2 weeks or, longer than our prime ministers? Or do we go for a slightly more expensive loose leaf Rossololo with purple leaves that has 1,000 times more polyphenols? And
so you really shop on colour?
Yes, now I do. I had no idea about this until doing it. But also the fact it's loose-leaved means that those plants have had to survive in more difficult conditions to fight off predators and wind and everything else. So they're tougher. That's why herbs and spices are also tough, because they're the growing tips of the plant. That's where you get all the good bits. And so it's a rethinking all this idea about what's good about food in this, when you start thinking about your gut and, you know, the sugars that it releases, etc. So for you, yeah, I mean, I think as a general rule, if everybody ate to keep their gut microbes happy, they'd be on a pretty healthy diet, even before you get into personalization.
Now, chapter 13 of your book, we talked about coffee there, is called Coffee Can Save Your Life. You mean that quite literally, don't you?
Yes. As an epidemiologist, if you drink 3 cups of coffee a day, you are less likely to die 10 years later.
Jesus Christ. But there's also a link between coffee, depression and suicide, right?
Well, there are lots of links.
Because I was reading that in studies, people were less suicidal if they'd been drinking coffee.
I think that I'm sure there is a study on that. In general, what I do when I look at these is I don't take any one study on its own. I would try to look at all the literature and say how many studies there are on that, and is there a confirmatory one that would make it real or not. So I've tried not to overclaim.
Yeah.
Because if you look at, you know, you look at the Daily Mail or, you know, the general press in the UK, they will pick up on any one story and say, coffee gives you cancer, coffee does this, coffee gives you dementia, next year, you know, it saves your life, it does this. So you can switch. But what I think people need to do is, you know, especially after COVID, is be much more sort of selective about how they see a study. It's epidemiology, you know, that it has to have confirmatory data. So I think, yeah, coffee, we know it improves sports performance by 1%, right? So for most people, that doesn't really matter, right? You know, 1%, am I going to run faster on my treadmill at the gym by 1%? No, but it does give you a little bit of focus, and for most people, it's a good drug that's found in food. And I like coffee because also it helps. It's allowed in a fast, so time restricted eating, you're allowed black coffee and black tea, and because it doesn't cause a sugar spike or anything else, but you have to cut out the sugar.
A quick one from our longest standing sponsor, Huel. I can't tell you over the last, really it's been about 2.5 years. It was really post-pandemic, how much my health has become such a huge priority in my life. Huel has been probably the most important partner in my health journey, because I've been in the boardrooms, I've been to their offices tens and tens and tens and tens of times. I've seen how they make their decisions on nutrition. And that's why it's such a wonderful thing to be able to talk to this audience about a brand and a product that is so unbelievably linked to my values and the place I am in my life of valuing the gym, exercise, movement, my mind, my breathing, and all of those things. And most importantly, my nutrition. That is the role Huel plays. And so every time I get to read these ads out, I do it with such passion because I really, really believe every word I'm saying. And I absolutely love the brand. So if you haven't already tried Huel and you've been resistant to my pestering, then give it a go and let me know how you get on. Quick one. Intel are one of our podcast sponsors, and I want to talk to you for a second about their Built for Business vPro platform. In today's working world, the office is pretty much anywhere, and Intel vPro means you can remotely manage, repair, and protect devices across your entire organization, no matter how large or small, giving me and my team peace of mind to work wherever we choose to. For my IT team, whether on-premise or via cloud, behind the corporate firewall or not, Intel's vPro comprehensive manageability has us covered. This is something that is so important to me. I'm a huge believer in employee flexibility and trust, so having features like this are super helpful. So to find out more, search intel.co.uk/vPro and let me know how you get on. I feel like more and more people are becoming gluten intolerant. I consider myself one of them. I am a self-diagnosed gluten intolerant. I read chapter 16 of your book and you think most of that is made up.
Yes. Most people who think they're gluten intolerant aren't when you test them. Okay, so that's the fact. It doesn't mean that everyone's making it up. Some of those will be real. But I think gluten got this bad rap about 10 years ago, and we know that, yes, 1% of the population really do have a gluten problem. It's called celiac disease, and they'll be vomiting and have terrible diarrhea with the smallest bit of gluten. Then there's a whole other group of people that believe they have gluten intolerance, of which studies show about 3/4 when they're tested with gluten are fine in a blinded way. If someone slipped you a biscuit or something, or pasta is often the way to trick people. And I think many people have probably a more general irritable bowel syndrome that are blaming gluten because they're taking that one protein that they know about from foods that have thousands of them and saying, this is the problem. Again, this reductionism. And then they cut everything out, but they might be cutting out things that were like the sandwich, for example, that was causing me glucose spikes. So they might feel better when they cut that out. And they then say, okay, I've cut out bread, therefore I'm not getting sugar spikes and tiredness. That must have been the gluten. But actually, it was nothing to do with that. It's just cheap bread that has nothing to do with it. So I think often people are taking gluten as an excuse, and sometimes they do feel better when they cut out all those foods because they're eating less processed foods as a result of it. Not always, but it's something else in the bread or the pasta that they were eating too much, or they were eating it too fast, or these things that I think are important. So I would urge everyone to, look again at whether it is gluten or it is something else about their food habits before that was bad, and reevaluate it and, build up your plant diversity and your gut microbes instead. Because the worry is that all these people on gluten, most of them have a rather restrictive diet. They get very worried about new foods, and that's like the worst scenario because you end up on a vicious circle where you get more and more nervous, so you have a smaller and smaller group of foods you're happy with.
Yeah.
Your microbes get diminished, and you have much less flexibility to deal with any new food that hits you.
One of the we've got a fitness group amongst some of my friends. There's about 10 of us in it, and we've been tracking how often we work out and how frequently we work out and the workouts that we do. And one of the things I have to say is pretty much no one in the group has lost any weight. We've been doing this for a year, and that kind of bucks what you would think. So the only time that I lost weight was actually when I went on the keto diet. I went from 14 stone 8 to 13 stone 8 in several weeks. But exercising for almost religiously for the last 2.5 years doesn't really seem to impact my weight at all in the way that the fitness experts might tell me on Instagram. What's your stance on the role that exercise plays in weight loss?
It has very little role in weight loss. All the studies, long-term studies, show it doesn't help weight loss, and it's been grossly exaggerated as an easy fix for our obesity problem.
Exercise doesn't help weight loss?
No. All the studies show that. The only caveat to that is if you have changed your diet, improved your diet, and you've lost some weight, maintaining some exercise does help prevent it going back up again. But as on its own, if you don't change your diet, it's of no use. And that's well known now by all the obesity experts and all the studies.
Does sugar make us fat? Is that the culprit? Is that one of the main things that's contributing to?
No, again, that's reductionism.
Okay.
But the reason exercise doesn't work is, it's important to realize this, is because we all know this, that you go for a walk, you build up hunger before a meal. That's what your parents told you, and everything about exercise is after it, your body slows down, your metabolism slows down, and it tries to regain the energy that you've lost. That's just our evolution. And so that's why it's great for your health. I exercise, fantastic for your mood. It's great for your heart, anti-cancer, all kinds of things. We should all do it, but absolutely not if your goal is weight loss. You have to do something about changing your diet. And I think that's the big, a huge myth particularly perpetuated by gyms and fitness apps and everything else. And it is complete nonsense.
I read that you, when you looked at studies over 30 years and you looked at how many studies had been done on the relationship of exercise and weight versus things like sugar and weight, there was 12 times more studies done on the relationship of exercise and weight versus sugar and weight. And why is that? Why is there less research done on the latter?
I think that's the influence of governments and the food companies and the drink companies. So a lot of the exercise research done in the last 20 years was sponsored by large corporations who wanted to make this link between exercise and weight loss so that they could continue to sell sugary, ultra-processed foods and drinks and just say it's childhood obesity is because we don't have playgrounds and we don't encourage this. And that's why the Cokes and the Pepsis are always there at the sponsoring Olympic events and associating themselves with sport. And they gave hundreds of millions to various physiology departments, sports departments, nutrition departments to do research in this area. Basically, it was really hard to get anyone to do research into how sugary drinks make you gain weight or cause problems, because the amount of money for nutrition has been abysmally poor, from governments, and that's why only the first ever study of ultra processed food in a controlled trial was only about 3 years ago, and it's been around for 30, 40 years. So such is the power of that lobby that it doesn't necessarily distort the research in a sort of evil way, but they point it to make sure that the researchers are working in an area that they want people to work in, and distracting them, keeping them away from talking about sugars or even artificial sweeteners, which in my view are nearly as bad because they're sort of hidden, and deflecting us from the idea that yes, giving kids sugary drinks or even artificial sweet drinks is going to be bad for them and cause obesity.
Wait, so I cut out sugary drinks about a year ago. I still have the same brands, but I have the no sugar version.
Oh dear.
Oh shit! What do you mean, oh dear?
Well, all the summary of the trials shows that if you take young adults and kids, and they were say on 2 cans of full sugar sodas, and you change them to the diet version, there's no real difference in weight or metabolic changes in their blood. You will go to the dentist less, so you don't get as many fillings, but and yet you should be gaining 300 calories, right, if you were doing 2 cans a day. So it doesn't work out as it should do, and that's because of these chemicals are not inert. So the sweeteners in kids, they change their brains to give them they want more sweetness in their food. Okay, so it could reflect your wish for your late night milk chocolate. Who knows? And it makes it very difficult to train kids to have more bitter foods or sour foods if they've got these artificial sweeteners in their diet all the time. But they've now shown that all these sweeteners actually affect your gut microbes. So even stevia, these sort of so-called healthy ones, have an effect on your gut microbes, and they're not inert. So we know that saccharin and sucralose also cause spikes in your blood sugar. When I did it, I have a trace. They're not supposed to, but they actually do things they're not supposed to. So we know very little about these products, and my view is that they are harmful, probably not as bad as having the sugar, but they are absolutely not a health drink, and we should be encouraging people to have teas and kombuchas and more bitter tasting, interesting flavors and foods than just this ultra sweet chemical concoctions.
It's this sugar conglomerate that have been funding much of the research that points towards some of the things you were talking about there. That's also the conglomerate that wants us to believe the calories in, calories out approach, because if I just view all foods as kind of equal and on this sort of calorie number, then I can drink some of the sugary fizzy drinks and some of the processed foods. As long as I keep it within that sort of calorie deficit, I'll be fine. And so is that sugar conglomerate, is the processed food conglomerate for the calorie model?
Absolutely.
They need that, right?
Absolutely. It's vital, 0 calories or 1 calorie, on the can. That's what you see. And, you're fooling people into thinking this is a healthy drink. And, if I used to have full Coke or Pepsi and now having the diet version, I'm getting 300 calories less a day, I should lose weight. It's exactly what they've been doing. And they're also desperate to show that artificial sweeteners are really healthy, and they come down on anyone who tries to say that they're, could be in any way dangerous. And yet they're not obliged to test them. So none of the chemicals added really go through rigorous testing on how they affect our gut microbes. And this is their testing mechanisms haven't changed in 50 years.
The gut microbiome, the microbiome as an organ, one of the things you talked about earlier was the impact it has on mood. And, this podcast was started as kind of a business podcast. We have a lot of people that are interested in, being more productive, being more successful, reaching for their goals. How significant and how pertinent is the microbiome on my performance as an entrepreneur, as a business person? What do I need to know about the relationship as it relates to my mood, my performance, my mind?
Well, we know more about mood than anything else. And so we do know that depression and anxiety is intricately linked to the quality of your gut microbes. We know this from mouse studies where they've transplanted poo from anxious mice into sterile mice, and those new mice then become anxious and depressed.
Really?
So it's a transmissible condition. And if you go back to me telling you that one of the chemicals that our microbes produce is serotonin, okay, some sort of cuddle, love, friendly, warm chemical that affects our brain, that, is the key to dopamine and everything else that goes on in our head. So the levels of that are really important for us having the right neurochemical balance in our head that stops us getting very depressed or very anxious. So we know that you can transmit it between animals.
So when they say they take the poo out of one mouse, they put it inside its gut, inside its stomach, to give it the same microbiome makeup inside its stomach.
Yeah,
and
so
then that mouse will become depressed and anxious.
Yes. So a lot of the science behind microbiome is based on large-scale human studies where you've just got cross-sectional data, or this is associated with this, but you don't know if it's cause or effect. Mm-hmm. And so there's this whole other group that's been going on of projects for 30 years where they have these sterile mice who have no microbes, and you create in a lab these other microbes that you would make them anxious, or they're genetically anxious. You look at their microbes and you take their microbes and you put them into the sterile mice, and you can change their mood and their attention span and everything else about that. So that shows that these have a direct effect rather than just being secondary. And that it links to the human data that shows if you take groups of depressed or anxious people, virtually all of them will have deranged microbiomes and be producing abnormal chemicals. And there have been now some recent studies showing that compared to traditional antidepressant medication, probiotics do as well in many of these studies if you give a course of probiotic medication. But even more impressive is if you give them a Mediterranean gut-friendly diet. You get actually better results with more remission than you do with antidepressant medication. So it's one of the best examples of how feeding your gut can actually improve your mood. And it's particularly important because we're seeing an epidemic of anxiety and depression. That's partly because of not having many good gut microbes to start with, lots of junk food diets, which make it worse. And then, of course, once you go into that cycle, once you're depressed, you're not thinking about food. The last thing you want to go out and is, I've got to go and get my kimchi today. It's just fuel. So once you understand that, you realize if you want to help someone with depression, the first thing is not to put them straight onto an antidepressant, which in many cases doesn't work because of this individuality, as we're talking about, which probably again related to the microbes because they break down the tablet into its active chemicals, but is to make sure they've actually got gut-friendly diet. And so this is a really exciting area of research.
You mentioned attention, the impact that the microbiome can have on attention. That's really interesting to me because ADHD has become a very widely discussed topic. Do you think there's a link between ADHD and the microbiome?
Highly likely, yes. I mean, there's less data in it than there is in depression and anxiety. The studies are smaller, but those that I've seen all show, again, an abnormality in the gut microbiome of ADHD kids. And there have been a few studies showing that you can reverse it with poo transplants, which is another area that was quite big a few years ago. It's not showing the same potential as it did, but certainly affecting attention and mood with gut microbes is definitely on the cards. These studies need to be bigger, but there's certainly preliminary evidence that what's true for depression and anxiety is also true for this whole spectrum of other conditions. Also, that have been linked in the past to diet and, over sugar and E numbers and all these kind of things. So we've sort of known vaguely there's an association, but I think people haven't really pinpointed the gut microbiome, which I think they should. And so absolutely sure that if you improve the diet of many of these kids with ADHD, you would improve their symptoms. And I know there are some ongoing trials at the moment.
It's really been startling over the last couple of years how mental health has really taken center stage in conversations, even conversations on this podcast. Most of them, we discuss mental health issues and things like anxiety and depression. And as we look around the world, the stats around people that are being prescribed antidepressant pills, like they're called SSRIs, I believe, is rising. And I think it's doubled over the last decade or so, with the US kind of leading the way, and then other countries like China and Japan at the bottom of the pack. What's your overall view on these disorders, depression, mental health, anxiety? Do you think it stems predominantly from the microbiome? Is that your perspective now from what you've learned?
No, I think they're multifactorial. So I think we can't just blame the gut microbiome, because you do get these conditions in people who are otherwise healthy. Genetics plays a role. I'm going back to my old my old career. A lot of evidence of strong genetics in things like depression, anxiety, but you can have the tendency to it, but you need to be triggered into it. You need some environmental event, and it could be that once your gut microbes get in such a bad, your gut health is such a poor state, your diet is so bad, that triggers this, and you just lack those chemicals that tip you over into it. So that's why I think if you link these epidemics, which we're going through at the moment, whether it's dementia, depression, obesity, diabetes, what are they all linked for? Increasing amounts of ultra-processed foods in our diet. We're the number one country in Europe for this. Rates are still going up. Kids have over 70% of their food as ultra-processed now. Horrendous. Adults, it's nearly, between 50 and 60% of our meals. So I think that effect on the gut microbes probably just tips this threshold in people who are susceptible. So it could be that I think that threshold is going to vary genetically. Some people are very resilient. Some people are actually quite susceptible. And that's my view of it, which probably isn't popular because it's, again, I make things more complicated than people like. But, I think as a scientist, I think most of these diseases are built up of a different number of risks. But unlike your genetics, your gut health is something you can do something about.
And that's what you're doing with Zoe.
Exactly. That's the whole idea behind Zoe, is to empower people to change their health by individualizing what they eat that suits their own metabolism.
What is Zoe, if someone hasn't heard of Zoe before?
Zoe is a personalized nutrition company that I founded nearly 6 years ago with two my co-founders who came to one of my talks. I was talking about the diet myth and the microbiome, and they came up to me and said, we think what you're doing is really exciting. We'd love to talk about getting a company together to personalize this. And I do get people asking me to do startup companies, and I said, I'm not really interested unless we can spend several million on doing research first. I'm not interested in the usual lifestyle company based on marketing. Mm-hmm. And I thought I'd never see them again, but they came back 2 weeks later, said, yes, we've got several million, we're up and running. So I was stuck then, I couldn't say no. And basically we got together this massive study called the PREDICT study, which looked at 1,000 people, mainly twins, gave them these identical meals, gave them these really fancy tech glucose monitors. We're measuring blood spots with fat, looking at their microbes, logging foods, seeing how they got on for 2 weeks, and use that data as algorithms to then predict how people respond to any food. And then we developed a home test and launched that initially in the US and in the last year the UK. And we've now got 50,000 people doing this identical home test, which is now a program that they then, once you've got your scores personalized to you, you can look up any food and it gives you a score from 0 to 100 on what how that food is for you based on your sugar, your glucose, blood sugar profile, your fat profile, and your microbiome. So it's pushing everyone to have less sugar peaks, less fat peaks, and better gut health. And so it's changed, so in a way that's, my muesli would give me a terrible score. My orange juice would, a score of 0. But it's also made subtle changes. So, I used to eat bananas and now they scored badly. So now I have pears instead or apples. Little minor shifts often pushing people. And then you have a virtual nutritionist who helps you plan your menus to get overall scores that are pushing you more and more in this healthy direction. So you just start to understand what's best for your body and in a sustainable way. And we don't talk about calories. It's like a taboo word. And we're not after crash dieting or anything else. It's like improving yourself from the inside out. And most people get dramatic improvements in their energy levels, which we hadn't even thought about as the reason. But people started telling us, I feel much better because maybe we're cutting out all these fat and sugar peaks that until the technology came along, no one knew about that were causing these problems. So it's going super well. We've got still 250,000 people waiting for the product in the UK on the waiting list. Wow. And what's really nice is because we've got this commercial arm, it allows us to do these other, we have the Zoe Health Study, which is a free app, which now we're sort of moving that towards lifestyle, like these fasting aids and things like this. We've got a neat podcast, the Zoe Nutrition Podcast, which is getting the word out about our science, plus blogs and things. So, it's part of a whole package of things that we're doing to sort of educate people differently and as I said, make people think about food in a very different way. And I think it's super exciting because we've just raised some more money. We've done some crowdfunding as well, which has gone amazingly well.
I saw it this morning.
Yeah.
It's a big valuation for a company.
Yes, it is. And, I think
200 million, that's a big number.
It is. But I think we've just got people's attention at exactly the right time.
I agree.
And the technology has just been exactly right. So often it's about timing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've had, as I said to you before we start recording, I've had 2 of my guests come here and tell me about Zoe individually. So I think it was Davina McCall and Gabby Logan, who both mentioned it. And then I had this email in my inbox from a friend of mine who connected me to George. And then I started reading about some of the work that you'd done and saw some of your videos. And that's why I was compelled to reach out and have you on this podcast. But the idea of personalized health kind of debunks the long-standing narrative and myth that there's this one perfect diet for all of us. There's this one set of foods that we should all be eating to be healthy. And this personalized approach makes a lot more sense. So I think that's the kind of the moment in time that you've arrived perfectly in from a Zoe perspective, is this awakening to the perspective that personalized individual diets are the way forward.
Yeah. And of course, COVID was an amazing time for apps.
Yeah.
And
of course.
People wanting to take control when they feel they had no control. So I think the idea that you give people an app and they suddenly are empowered to do things is a very new idea, particularly in the UK. People said, no one over 60 is ever going to do that. They told us it's going to fail. And it was an incredible success, because if you give people that interaction, that feeling that they are talking to someone and they're getting information back and it's a two-way process, it's a completely different idea to the old way of communicating with people. So I think it is a super exciting time for science. And, we've just scratched the surface of what we can do with this personalization, because once we get to 1 million people, the levels of detail we can provide back about whether you should be eating in the mornings and the evening, how hungry does this food make you feel? How do you individually stop getting those sugar dips? How, what combination of foods should you have? How do you react to protein? What do you do to best sleep well? All these things which people want to know are going to be possible once we get these huge numbers.
This is all quite, it's all, we turn on I'm going to have this conversation with you, then I'm going to turn on the TV or go on the internet or go on Instagram, and all of the influencers there are going to be telling me a bunch of stuff, a bunch of fatty diets, because they've all got their own incentives and their own ways of making money. If there was like one principle I could take away from all of your work, which I know is almost an impossible task to do, but if there was one thing just to focus on as I try and navigate the bombardment of social media and advertising posts that I'm going to be on the receiving end of as I leave this conversation, what would that kind of guiding principle be for me not to forget?
Pick changes that are going to last for life, not as a quick fix. I think that's what we're after, and that's what we want to try and instill, is this sustainable, healthy way of eating.
So that means not feeling like I'm not depriving myself and...
No.
Okay.
I think absolutely. The philosophy we have at Zoe is that nothing is off the table. Nothing's banned.
White chocolate?
Even white chocolate. You can be the Milky Bar kid. you can have it, but realize that it's that rare treat.
Okay.
And the more you so it doesn't break everything, and you have to start again. It's about making sure that the rest of your week is full of good foods that give you a high score that can make up for it. So we all gonna, the Christmas season, everyone goes crazy and overeats and stuff. As long as, you've got this long-term plan that your gut is healthy and you're working and you're not going to get these peaks over time for years, that's the goal. So absolutely, it's about enjoying food, realizing that it's an incredibly important social event. It's why the Mediterranean countries probably do so much better, because it's so much part of family life and social life, even in the elderly, whether it's with a glass of wine. It's just taking more time enjoying the novelty of foods and increasing our range of foods. So it's really broadening it. So I really want everyone to love food again and not have all these hang-ups about, I can't have that, I can't have this. If you've got enough plants on your plate, basically, you can eat anything.
Tim, thank you. I feel like that's a good place to end. And I'm really going to go upstairs and reconsider that vitamin stack that I have, and also throw out all those 0-calorie, sugar-free drinks that I thought were good for me. You've given me a lot to think about, and I'm incredibly honoured to have met you at this time in my life, because, as I said, it's very relevant to me, but also to have been given the chance to read your books. You've got so many amazing books, 5 of them in total, I believe. You're working on a new one. My favourite was these 2. So the spoon-fed book, and also your most recent book, which is Food for Life, which is basically like a glossary of food. Is that an accurate statement? It goes through all the key main foods and talks about the role they play in our health.
Yes, I mean, it's been called a food Bible or
Food
sort of A to Z, but it's a practical guide to pretty much all the common foods. So you can get what the latest science is telling you about them all from a ethical, health and environmental perspective.
We have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest asks a question for the next guest, not knowing who they're asking it for. So the question that's been left for you is, you seem nervous.
I am very nervous.
Why do people always seem to get nervous when I ask this question versus all of my questions?
Ask me any science question, I don't mind.
Well, it's, the question that's been left for you is, if you could say one thing to a family member you've lost, who would it be? What would you say and why?
Well, it's got to be to my dad. I guess I'd probably say, I'm really sad we never got to talk properly. And I think you'd be proud of me now. And because, as I've explained, he died when I was 21. It's just the time you're sort of coming out of studentship, you're becoming more mature at the time you could start to talk to your parents, but you don't. So I feel that's my missing part of my life, if you like, that I never got to discuss anything meaningful with my father.
Why was that? I have that problem too now. I have that problem where I struggle to talk to my father.
I don't know. I think in hindsight, it's a much easier thing to say, I should have done this.
Yeah, that's what I'm scared about.
And I think it could be that it's built into us that, we have a very different relationship with our fathers that makes it hard to actually talk to them at the same level, or not feel some sort of competition or critique. So I think you're absolutely right that if I was sat down here with my father, it would be quite different to wishing I had done all those years ago. And I think it's part of that grieving process, probably, that having lost someone, you always feel somehow responsible. You should have done something before. I think that's part of it. And many people have recurrent dreams also about, because my father, I never saw him. I was just told he's dead. Came back from holiday, that was it. Go to the funeral. And it was an unreal series of events for me. And so for years, I used to have these dreams. He'd been in South America and suddenly appeared again. Oh, so I had to disappear, and I've come back. So that was an interesting idea going on in my brain that, in some ways, he wasn't really dead, and I'd get a chance to talk to him again. So it must have been, a key part in those subconscious bits of my brain.
That communication goes both ways, though, doesn't it? Because they have to also be.
Yeah, in retrospect, he was very much a 1960s dad, who wasn't really supposed to deal with children or anything else. He went to work and stayed in his study, and because he wasn't sporty, he never did anything with me. So absolutely, yeah, it's. But as I think you've talked about before on this podcast, children have a very different perception of that relationship. They feel it's their fault in a way.
Yeah.
But he was not by modern standards, he wouldn't have been seen as a great dad.
Tim, thank you. What a wonderful conversation. Really, really appreciate your time, and thank you for coming in and sharing your wisdom with me.
Absolute pleasure.
Quick word from one of our sponsors. I've got a tip for all of you that will make your virtual meeting experiences, I think, 10 times better. As some of you may know by now, Blue Jeans by Verizon offers seamless, high-quality video conferencing. But the reason why I use Blue Jeans versus other video conferencing tools is because of immersion. Their tools make you feel more connected to the employees or customers you're trying to engage with. And now, they're launching one of their biggest feature enhancements to impact virtual events so far called Blue Jeans Studio. I actually used it the other day. I did a virtual event using the studio, which I think about 700 of you came to. TV-level production quality, all done by one person with very little technical experience on a laptop. So if you've got an event coming up and you're thinking about doing it virtually, check out Blue Jeans Studio now. Let me know what you think, because I genuinely believe, I know this is an advert and I'm supposed to say this, but I genuinely believe it's the best tool I've seen for doing really immersive, simple but high quality production virtual events. Quick one, as you might know, Crafted are one of the sponsors of this podcast, and Crafted are a jewelry brand and they make really meaningful pieces of jewelry. I think I've worn this piece for almost a year. It hasn't broken, hasn't changed colour because it's really, really good quality, and it costs roughly 50 quid. I'm not the type of person that has Rolexes or jewellery that cost tens of thousands of pounds. I want pieces that are reliable, that look beautiful, and that hold meaning and significance for me. And that's exactly why I've worn Crafted for so long. And when we had the conversation about them sponsoring this podcast, I was so unbelievably keen for them to do so. Check it out if you're a guy, craftedlondon.com. And yeah, if you get any pieces of Crafted, tag me and let me know what you think.